It's here. It's now. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Nadia Pavlevska. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. And this episode is sponsored by Total Wine & More, where you find what you love and love what you find. Not while we're here today, actually getting ready to take off on a great trip to Armenia and Paris and do some podcasting out there. But while we're in Southern California, let's have a conversation with a Southern California wine influencer and educator, Nadia Pavlevska. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Paul.
You know, she said to me when she walked in, why would you have somebody on that doesn't speak English? But you speak English.
Trying. For the last 20 years, I have been trying.
So you're from Bulgaria. You were speaking to your mother on the phone when you walked in, and I didn't recognize the language. You came from Bulgaria, but when was that?
I came to the United States in 99, late 99. Before that, I actually lived in Austria for a while.
Really? You
Yes.
speak German then too? Or Austrian?
I was absolutely fluent, better. My German was much better than my English.
Wow.
Fluent, no accent. The issue is I learn English primarily here on the streets, basically. Not really. But it's hard when you learn language late.
You're in the beach cities, so you must speak surfer English, as I did.
Paul, I wish I had a first, I must say, miserable year in Sacramento.
Oh, you started in Sacramento?
I started in
Not a
Sacramento.
pretty place.
And it was super lonely, empty place. From Salzburg to Sacramento as a young woman, it was pretty interesting.
Salzburg is like the Christmas town, that's the perennial Christmas town. That's where you lived?
Yes. It was
That's
gorgeous.
beautiful there.
Fairy tale city.
It is. It really is. You know, Mozart's birthplace, I think, right? Or you lived there for a while, and that Walk Street, and man.
Yes.
So that's an interesting thing. Because I do want to produce a show, and we won't get into it too far today, but there's some wonderful stories of immigration success, meaning not necessarily dollars, but some personal success coming to America. And I think it's a whole subject in itself. My dad's from Cairo, Egypt. My mother-in-law's from Iran. So there's a wonderful stories to tell. But how did you leave Bulgaria to go to Salzburg, and then Salzburg to go to Sacramento, which is kind of bizarre?
The short story. I went actually to a German high school in Bulgaria. So
Really?
I studied everything in German. German was my second language, or actually third, because I grew up in communism. Russian was mandatory. And I got accepted in Salzburg University to study communications, public relations on a government scholarship. And after school, I transferred to Salzburg University.
Does that give you a certain level of confidence to have these languages under your belt, or it's just part of your lifestyle and you don't really think of it that way, and being able to have the gumption or the desire to leave a town and come to a new town, a new area, a new world?
No, I just feel like you have to speak the languages when you go to places. It's the problem is after speaking 4 languages, in the end, I feel like I don't speak any language perfect. And sometimes
yes.
I mix them together, So
Well, your Bulgarian must be pretty good.
it is, but to be honest, I'm starting to miss some words.
Yeah.
It comes in English first.
Sure. I'm saying that from the position my father spoke 5 languages. All of them that he would say when he was in Cairo as a high schooler, they had to go to French, English, and Arabic classes every day. And so he never felt like he spoke all of them perfectly. He goes, I always spoke farmer Turkish. We spoke Armenian in the house, and I spoke, colloquial Arabic. But wherever we went in the world, you could hang out. So this is, for an American, that's a big thing. Speaking multi-languages it's a learned, difficult task.
Yes, but English, everybody speaks English.
Yeah,
so
that's true eventually.
Yeah.
So I took
easy.
on French for my father because he spoke French, and before he passed away last year, we were conversing in French and had a great time doing that. And I did it for him. I thought, Arabic was too hard, so I didn't want to do that. Anyway, so you got to America, were you in wine prior to this, before you came to, let's say, the beach cities?
No, Paul. It's interesting. When you grow in Bulgaria, you start with the hard liquor. As a teenager, we were drinking vodka, Coke, gin tonic. Bulgaria makes a lot of great brandy.
Vodka Coke. Wait a minute. That stopped me for a second. I was thinking Jack Daniels and Coke, but vodka Coke. Okay, whatever.
This was actually very popular.
I think the Russians would have a problem with this, no?
I think it was popular in Russia too, but I can't say for sure. I don't know. Yeah.
But you were drinking distilled spirits. Wine was not a
Distilled.
thing. But there are Bulgarian wines. I've had them, but
Homemade wine. Everybody in Bulgaria makes wine. I drank some homemade wine. It's basically fermented juice with some.
and this
lot
was
of
all during
sugar.
the Soviet part of.
Yes.
It was sort of it was a necessity to drink like that.
I don't know if it's a necessity, but definitely was a part of the culture. I don't know what came first.
Yeah, right.
But
And so when did socialism? When did the Soviet? Was it 1991 or so? That
90.
1990.
90, yeah. I was in German high school when the Berlin Wall fell down, and
Oh, wow.
it was kind of
Wow.
interesting.
Was that a good thing for Bulgaria? Would they look at it today and say, "Wow, we wish it hadn't happened. We still had the Soviets here," or this new era, as this freedom is?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, Paul, and we can talk forever.
Probably go for it. That's probably
And I surprise, my answer sometimes surprise Americans. I grew up, my childhood was during communism.
Mm-hmm.
My father was against it. He fought for democracy. We had the blue democratic flags when everything was happening.
Wow.
However, during communism, everybody lived well. You know, everybody was middle class, very safe. We never locked our doors. You know, we had everything, we wanted.
So interesting.
And it went downhill.
Yes.
I think we didn't know how to transition.
Well, it's hard.
And
Armenians did the same thing.
And my father, after all this years later, he became nostalgic for the communist era.
Really?
Not the communism, but just the
Yeah,
way
right.
that things were.
The
Not
lifestyle.
the lifestyle. Yeah.
It's interesting because we're going to Armenia Friday. It's the same conversation. They became free in 1991, and there's a faction that would kind of appreciate going back to the way it was. That's really interesting. So
Yeah.
wine was not part of the culture in Bulgaria, obviously. You come to America, you're in Salzburg, which German and Austrian wines are very popular these days. Was that where you started to sort of pique your interest, or not till you got here?
Okay, I started drinking wine in Austria, but I was incredibly poor student in Austria. And I remember I was drinking a wine, I think it was a jug wine called the Three Musketeers, and once in a while I would have...
Sounds delicious.
It was some cheap stuff. But I always I started working there in the hospitality industry. And for the last 20-something years, I have been in the hospitality industry. And this is where I just started slowly appreciate wine more and more.
Speaking
Working
of
in restaurants.
hospitality, when we were in Salzburg, we went. It was St. Patrick's Day, which of course is probably not a huge event for Salzburgians, but there's that brewery just outside of town, and we went to a grand party there.
Spiegelbier.
Yeah, Spiegel. Yeah, Stiegel.
Stiegelbier. Yeah,
Yes.
Stiegel, not Spiegel. Gosh.
Stiegel, no, right?
Stiegelbier.
Oh God, so good! And we had a great party on on St. Patrick's Day. Anyway, so Austrian wine, which is actually becoming more popular, and we'll talk about what you're doing with it today. But so you come to Sacramento, not the hotbed of wine, though there is some wonderful wine districts north of Sacramento. You start studying hospitality, which is, that the whole, and I don't know, the listeners. When we talk about hospitality, we're talking about serving food and wine. We're talking about educating food and wine. We're talking about any industry or any part of the industry where you are the consultant, but also the server. I mean, it's a lot of humility in hospitality. Is that what brought you to it, or is it just the education of it?
I have a business degree from the same school as you. I'm a Trojan. I ended up.
That's right. I forgot.
Yeah,
you
I
are.
have a business administration degree, And my concentration was finance, actually.
Wow.
And I had a couple miserable years in finance. But all these years working in restaurants and developing love for wine, and I started piling certifications for wine, in wine. And I thought I'm doing it for myself. I didn't think I'll do ever anything with it. But when my corporate career in finance didn't work, I said, what do I love the most? It's wine and working with people. And I just decided, why not just go
Wine
full
not,
time.
right? Wine not. No,
Why
that's-
not? Yes.
So let me tell you about that. Let's talk about the certifications, because when I started in this industry in 1988, they weren't really around. Wine was not part of the American culture. It's growing. It takes a lot of time for that to occur. And certifications were necessary, and they seem almost necessary now to have one to earn any credibility. Do you agree with that? Or
Yes, I agree with that, because if you look at jobs, I occasionally glance at the jobs out there. All restaurants now, they want at least at the first level sommelier course from the Court of Master Sommeliers or the WSET or anything. So it really helps. And honestly, Paul, you told me, you invited me here because you saw all the acronyms
That's
after
true.
my
I did
name.
say
See,
that.
I got you with that, so it works,
it's kind of important.
So it's kind of important. Would you invite me if you didn't see all
Well,
this?
that's a good question. Probably not, just because that's the first thing that are there. But at the same time, I have an opinion about the credentials. But I think it's important to have them for this kind of thing. Here's my opinion. You can reflect on it. Yes, they're certifications. To me, they're more an academic, structured way to learn about wine. In other words, all the books are out there. All the opportunities to taste wine are out there, but there's no course in it, so to speak, until you decide to go to WSET or the Court of Sommeliers or the Master of Wine route, whatever. So it's sort of a pathway that's structured to learn about wine. And so if I'm a consumer, would you recommend it? When you do your classes, do you recommend, hey, just go take the WSET one?
No.
Like,
No.
no. You say that for yourself. That's right.
No. Okay, as an educator, I better know wine. And the truth is, I'll never read as much and study as much, wine in such a greater detail if I didn't go
Right.
through all the certifications.
Sure.
Of course, I believe that my best school was working in restaurants, tasting wine. I always tell consumers the best way to learn about wine is taste wine.
That's right.
And for consumers, what I actually recommend very often, because they're intimidated by all the international grape varietals out there, and that's why they're stuck. Usually the 4 grape varietals: Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay. I hear this all the time. I tell them, go to one of these big events that it's like Discover Spain or, CapFest. Just try wines, you pay the ticket and you go and taste and try to remember what you like, what you don't like. Just taste.
Well, I think that's accurate. I was telling my wife the other day a story, and the book's not here. It was about May Song, who went through the war in Bordeaux at Comtesse de Lalande. And fast forward the story, we were in Bordeaux in 1993. Our host said, let's go have dinner with the Comtesse. I don't know what he's talking about. I was in the industry 5 years. I didn't really care. I didn't have any knowledge base of Bordeaux, really, and I hadn't studied it at all, and I had no idea who I was having dinner with. Now, it took me literally like 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I realized I had dinner with this woman who's so famous in many periodicals and books about the history of Bordeaux. And I regret that. I regret not having studied more early on in this career, because they were here tasting. The stories were right there. They were in front of me, but I just ignored them because I wanted to taste what was in the bottle, and that's all I cared about. So there's sort of a combination of things. So when you're teaching classes now, so you mentioned when we were talking off camera that you started in sort of the consumer education of wine.
Yes.
By hosting tastings.
Yes.
And
Yes.
how do we do this? I mean, where'd you get your list? Who came? Are these friends of of Nadia. What's what? That's the name of the organization,
Yes,
Friends of Nadia.
yeah, I have many friends who support me. That's true, but you know what? I always say, friends can't make your
They can't make
business.
a career, for sure.
You can't make your friends prisoners to your
All the time,
business
right.
ideas. As I mentioned to you, I worked as the wine director of a restaurant in Manhattan Beach, and I knew many people. After many years in the South Bay, I started knowing many people, and they actually kept asking me, hey, do you do something on the side? Do you do events? Some of them hired me for private events, and I decided to do consumer events. And I would rent a venue. I have an amazing team, still work with them for private and corporate events of chefs or people who help me, my support staff, and who just pick a team. We had for 4 years in a row, we had champagne extravaganza events. It's tasting 10 sparklings, some of the best sparklings from around the world. We had blending seminars. 3 years also in a row, we did South Bay Wine Challenge. That was so funny. People competing. I make them compete in teams in blind tasting and
Wow.
and trivia.
That's super.
It was amazing, but gosh, it was so much work too. People
Well-
don't realize how much work goes into organizing flawless wine event.
It's a logistical headache.
Yes.
Somebody was in
yes.
just the other day asking, this was a Thursday at the time, and she had an event on Sunday at a real establishment. Can you put on a wine tasting? Well, I don't have any more wine here since we sold the company. And I said, it's not that fast, right? It's like, you've got I want to know who's going to come. How long are they speaking? Who's bringing the ice? Where are the bus trays? Who's bringing the glasses? Who's going to pick up the glasses? Who's gonna
yes.
all these pieces
Yes.
that go into it.
Absolutely.
And you have to make it look seamless.
Absolutely. I always say nobody knows what's going on in the kitchen, or better, they don't know what's going on.
Yeah, right.
But I always expect, you have to expect that something is not going to go as planned.
right.
And you have to be flexible, quick, and regroup, put a smile on, and keep going,
I just think when you said blending seminars, which for the listeners would be, let's say everybody has 2 ounces of Cabernet, 2 ounces of Merlot, 2 ounces of Cabernet Franc, and 2 ounces of Petit Verdot. Let's use Bordeaux varietals, and you are having a contest to who can make the best blend, right? And so
Yes.
there's groups of however many. You have to make sure all those pieces are there, make sure all the glasses out there, make sure they have a graduated cylinder
glasses.
to measure what they're doing. And then who decides what was the best wine?
Oh, actually, you nailed it. I did exactly a Bordeaux blending seminar. I was very fortunate to be supported by Rodney Strong.
Oh, that's
They sent
nice.
me
Yeah.
the barrel samples of all
Wow.
5 Bordeaux varietals and the measurement kits and everything. Of course, I had to bring the hundreds of glasses, and I divide people in teams, and I made them come up with the best blend for the table. And I had actually friends of mine, sommeliers, that were the judges. I had judges.
Wow.
You submit your blend to the judge. You have to come up with the best name, best food and wine pairing, and best actual blend. And
What
it
a
was
great
fun.
event.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a lot of people
yeah.
had fun with that, I bet.
Oh, people get so competitive and so
Yeah.
excited about it. And, it's.
But it gives them a real insight to what happens in the lab at a winery, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they've got all these
Yeah.
different barrels and they got all these different, what's amazing for the listeners to understand is that you could have the same Cabernet from the same plot of land, crush it, ferment it, put it in a barrel, and then when you barrel thief that, when you taste them, they are going to be different because the wood is different and all the different parameters that go into making wine. So this gives them an insight into what the winemakers have to do, particularly
Absolutely.
the blended ones.
Absolutely. And better understanding of each grape varietals and what they like and what they don't like. Because my job was just basically to explain to them, okay, this is a Bordeaux blend, these are the varietals, this is what each one brings to the wine. You decide which way you want to skew your blend and hope for the best. And
I find that interesting because I was one of my comments here that I have in the notes, and it's sort of one of my newer rants, is that it's almost in some cases, I think, the wine industry self-perpetuates the aristocracy and, let's just use the word, snobbiness of wine by doing what you and I were discussing earlier, which is putting people in front of a camera, and they're tasting wine and talking about the cranberries and the wood and the cedar and the vanilla and all that, when you can't express it. And all of a sudden, a consumer says, I can't do that. And so I think there's a wall built between the consumer and this type of wine person. Here you are saying, no, we're going to put it in front of you and have you taste it and have you understand the process. But do you agree with me that we kind of self-perpetuate the aristocracy and the barriers of wine by speaking like
Please don't include me in this
Well,
number.
I mean,
I'm
we
like,
as,
I don't.
industry.
No. I'm joking. But yes.
that? Okay, I won't include you.
Yes. No, you are absolutely right. I actually can't agree with you more. And it's very unfortunate. Because let's face it, first of all, I always say, sommeliers, we shouldn't forget what we are. We are glorified servers.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is to serve wine and make people happy, help them make the best decision in wine, and the best wine is not the one, our geeky, whatever funky wine we like personally, but a good wine educator, a good sommelier would make a consumer feel comfortable about their taste, and it's going to figure out what's the best wine for them. I always tell people, don't listen to me in the end. You're going to hear a lot of things. I hope something resonates with you. And I open a little bit your horizons, but in the end, the wine you like the most is the wine. It's the best is the wine you like the most, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
That's such an interesting thought, and I think that's right on. But you said something kind of interesting, and that's we do this every day. We taste all the stuff you see in the store. We've presented wines to consumers forever. And yeah, we probably, after all of that, have a different look into what we're tasting, right? And so we're not necessarily attuned to the Joshes and the Camises and the Silver Oaks because they're great wines. They have their position in the wine world, but we've tasted so many of them that we kind of look for these weird, bizarre things, these funky things you say. And we can't expect the consumer to appreciate those funky things until they appreciated the stuff that everybody, generally tastes. Even a glass of Silver Oak the other night was very nicely made wine. But it didn't interest me that much because I opened a bottle of low-end Bordeaux next to it that was really well made, and that was way more interesting to me. But that's okay. We don't talk about that. We want the consumer to understand it's about your palate. And our job, like you said, is to serve. And I think that's the original function of a sommelier.
Oh, yes.
Right?
We are glorified servers. Yes. And the fact that we can taste some amazing, expensive wines, it doesn't make us that special. In most cases, we can't even afford those wines. And we sometimes get the wrong ideas.
Like learning Burgundy is a very expensive lesson in most cases, but there are some incredible wines as you've tasted that are reasonably inexpensive that tantalize our palates to try and taste again. You mentioned something very funny when we were talking off camera. You said that you would go to events as you were learning this industry, and you never stop learning, right? And you'd
you
fall
never
asleep.
stop learning. That's why I have so many certifications, because I think periodically we have to refresh our knowledge.
Sure, for sure.
I told you I signed up for a bourbon certification.
Yeah, right,
recently.
which is incredible.
It's
I'll
a little
talk
bit
about
dangerous path to
We'll
take.
talk about that.
Yes,
But
as
you
a
would
wine
fall asleep, you
educator.
said.
Yes, I'm very grateful that our industry, puts this free industry events.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever there is an educational component, like a master class, I always go because this keeps me refreshed and educated. But very often I go there and I am bored out of my mind. I
hope I wasn't teaching that
No, like I said, I'm falling asleep, and it comes down to delivery. And I learned as a wine educator that it's one of my first goal when I do a wine event is just to entertain people, to make people have fun, engage people. Mm-hmm. If people are engaged, people are not bored. You can be engaged and sleep,
That's true.
And I always remember how bored I can be, given that this is my subject. And when I think about the consumers, this should be even more true for them.
Animating. I think, as this podcast is meant to do, you want to inspire people to continue with their own path in wine. You want them. So here's the way I look at it: You want them to say, I can do this, inspire. You want them to say, gee, I didn't know that, educate. And you want them to go, that was a lot of fun, and, entertain.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you do, now you've moved into corporate events mostly, meaning, which this is fascinating. I want to peel this back a little more because it's gotten very popular to do groups. And I have something I'm going to share with you that I just need to pass on to somebody else. But they're using them more and more, virtually and live, right?
Oh, I am so incredibly grateful for the virtual events.
Yes.
This saved me during the pandemic. I probably have about 70 or 80 corporate events during the pandemic virtual.
Wow.
My biggest client is Oracle. Thank you, Oracle. I have probably about 40 events with them.
Wow.
And actually, virtual events taught me to be even more entertaining, because if you can keep people's attention, on the screen when they have so many distractions behind them, in person, it just became so easy afterwards.
Well, I always found when I did these things, that very conscientious about time, because once they start tasting the wine and the conversation starts to loosen up a little bit, all of a sudden, your role changes as the commentator and the narrator, not just speaking. And so what does Oracle hope to get out of these things, or anybody that puts on a corporate event?
Virtual events, the goal was to connect with customers, entertain customers.
Mostly customers.
Mostly, yes. These were CEOs, CTOs of companies that Oracle wants to do business with. And many other companies, IT companies or like finance companies was the same. Sometimes was team building, but it was truly, it's just to connect with the customer. They were not trying to push sales or anything. But this is also your excuse next day to call and say, hey, how did you like the wine I sent you? And chatting with Nadia, let's do business now.
So logistically, I think people need to understand, look, you have to send wine to these people. Right? Let's say they're all in America and they're all Oracle customers, but in order for them to participate, they had to have the wine, right? So you had to organize what you're going to taste and then get it to their address. And sometimes it doesn't get there.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Don't even start me. Those events were about shipping logistics.
We're here to start those conversations.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. I would be, I shipped also to Canada. Never,
Ooh,
ever again.
How'd you do that?
Oh.
That's impossible.
Oh, I was 4:00 in the morning getting up and arguing with customs.
100%
the
tax
different provinces.
And the whole thing.
It was, I shouldn't have done it, but I learned my lesson. So now if we had Canadian clients joining, I would go and search online the shops near them, wine shops, and tell them you go and you buy that.
Right. Let's take a break here. We're going to talk about our host today, which is Wine Talk. Wine Talks, that's me. Total Wine and More, the lowest prices in over 30 years. Always find what you love and love what you want at Total Wine and More. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. You must be 21 and drink responsibly. But I was there not too long ago. There's some Prosecco. The Prosecco aisle is amazing there. They have $8 Proseccos, which I think is a fabulous, as you might agree, alternative to some of the more expensive sparkling wines that are in the world. They have rosés for under $7. And since you're talking about bourbon, they have one of the great collections of bourbon at Total Wine and More. Like I said, you always find what you love and love what you find. Thank you, Total Wine and More. I've had on the show twice now, 2 radio show hosts that are in wine. And I just commented on LinkedIn, and I can't remember their names. But we have these wonderful podcasts because the barriers in Canadian wine consumption is actually growing, and the variety that they can get is growing. And each of the 3 provinces are all totally different rules. But when you brought that up, I had a client that was, what did I say? They're the concierges. They were concierges, is that even a word, to new incoming hockey players. So these kids that got all this money for signing on, supposedly they needed somebody to help them spend it. And so these guys, not these 2 I'm talking about, but these other guys would rent cars for them, lease cars for them, buy cars for them, and they always wanted a case of wine. Okay, listen, there's a case of wine in the trunk of the car that they bought.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a nice addition.
Exactly. And they wanted Opus, and they wanted all the famed American Napas. And they have many of the clients, of course, were in America because a lot of Canadian hockey players come here, but a lot of them, of course, were in Canada. And that's where I learned this is impossible. This is impossible.
It's
But
really
you
hard.
actually got some wine there like one time, and then you decided never to do it again?
I did. In certain places I did, and in the same time I had to destroy some wine.
Oh, God, that's so
You know, and it's just, or had to pay 2 times more than the cost of wine just to release it from customs.
Yeah, it's
just-
100%
it's-
tax
Yeah.
minimum. And so
Oh, it
then you
was-
try to find a ways around it by saying, well, maybe if I say the value of it's $3, you know, then I only
I
paid.
tried that, by the way. I tried.
It didn't work.
I didn't go with the $3, but
Yeah,
I
right,
did
right.
half price, you know.
So that the double price would be,
Yeah.
that's obvious. I have a client that I want you to take over for me, and what they do is I pick one wine, I send it to about 35 people, and then they use this as the precursor to, it's a software as a service company. So these are sometimes new clients, sometimes they're old clients, sometimes it's just the company themselves going over their thing. But I spend 15 minutes before their call, talk about wine, any subject, pick one, and then I click off, and they go on with their thing. In the meantime, they've got kind of loosened up a little bit with some wine, and I no longer do it. So I'm going to hand that over to you. You can make the contact and see if you can pull it off. It's about once every 4 or 5 weeks. Sound interesting?
It's you have this was the easy way to do it.
Yeah.
I would usually speak for an hour and a half.
No,
but
10 minutes.
This is easy breezy.
10 minutes for $100.
Absolutely,
For
anytime.
$100 is worth it.
$100. I don't open my eyes for
For $100, yeah.
$100.
Yeah, but for 10 minutes, you know, that's
10 minutes.
$400 an hour right there.
Let's negotiate after.
I hate this. You can have it. One of the pictures you sent me during our conversation before we came on the air here was a flight of, I don't know what kind of red wine it was, but you were doing a flight of judging at the California State Fair. How did you, I've never been asked. I've tasted 100,000 wines in my career. No one has ever asked me to judge an affair. Not an affair, in a fair. What?
First of all, I'm more charming than you are.
So,
No, joking aside.
All seriousness
I
aside,
think
go
it's all seriousness aside. Yeah, it's. I guess it's a luck. Of course, you have to be qualified, but I knew some people who were judging, and I expressed some interest, and they introduced me to the organizers, and
Do you enjoy
I sent
it?
them my bio. And I started my first ever competition. It was the San Francisco Chronicle wine competition, and I judge it every year. It's the biggest competition in the United States. Last week was the Cal State Fair wine competition, which is the oldest wine competition in California. But this is a wonderful way to connect with professionals, with winemakers, sommeliers, wine educators, and calibrate your palate a little bit and just learn from the other judges.
you know, the industry's changed so much in the last few years. And the reason I said that the way I did was I've been doing one of the ways we marketed this company from 1984 to 2007 is I would start at the Orange County Fair July 14th or June 14th, go to the Del Mar Fair, go to the California State Fair, end up at LA County, and I'd have a booth. And in LA County, my booth was in the judging area. I mean, we did really, really well signing customers up for people that came to experience the gold medal wines. But let's go to the consumer side of this. What is it that you're looking for when you're tasting these wines or comparing them that you want the consumer, that you're going to award a gold medal or silver or bronze? What are you trying to tell the consumer when you do that?
Okay. And we sometimes have this conversation all the time with other judges. To me, a very good judge first has to leave their personal preferences aside, you know? And you have to be objective as possible. But this should be always the case with wine. I'm looking for typicity. I want you, if you're buying a Cabernet, it better tastes like Cabernet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for balanced, good quality, and some competitions gives you also a price range. It just better deliver for the price.
Mm-hmm.
It's for if it's a gold medal, better be a solid wine representative of the region of the grape varietal, and it's just very palatable.
Do you think then that the value, the price of the wine, and I can't remember. I think the LA County Fair used to do it by price range. Does the Cal State Fair do it when they put
They
the book?
don't. And to be honest with you, I had this conversation even with the organizers. I have a hard time sometimes when I don't know the price, because if you tell me a wine, let's say I'm tasting a Chardonnay, and you tell me this Chardonnay is $50, I'm gonna say I don't like this wine.
Yeah.
But if you tell me this Chardonnay is $10, I'm gonna say this is a pretty good Chardonnay for $10.
For $10.
You know,
And I don't like this wine for $50.
I judge wine based on the price. Ideally, I wish wine to over deliver for the price
Yeah, of course.
we pay. We all try.
Well, that's what this club was based on for 50 years, was that there's always something really well made that's not as expensive as the thing. But it does cost for the consumer to understand. If you're going to barrel age and new French oak, that's going to cost you more money than somebody that's not doing that. And so the price differential doesn't mean it's going to taste better, as we understand, but it certainly could mean that they spent more money making it. But eventually, almost all top-level wines are probably about the same price to produce, depending on the land and everything else. But I think that's a very important feature, is like, this is, well, I will say, I use this as a joke, but it's true. Only in my career, only once did a wine taste different after they told me the price. Right?
Yeah,
it still tastes the same, but got a little better when they told me it was only $3 wholesale cost instead of the 20. I thought
absolutely.
it was, right?
Yeah, your buying decisions. It's
sometimes that happens. But so, do you think that the Sucklings, the Parkers, the Enthusiasts, the other periodicals have that same approach when they're giving wines 90 and 100 and 200 points, or is it politically driven, or what do you think? Oof. You don't have to name any names and get yourself in trouble.
I'm not going to name names, but I tell people when I educate, I say I don't follow critics. I'm not influenced very much by scores. Mm-hmm. And I say, if you look at scores and you decide to go this route, you should try to find a critic that is aligned with your own taste. Because it's just, yes, I think, I like to believe they're trying to be as objective as possible, but in the end, we are subjective creatures. Wine is a subjective topic, and you are like a preference is gonna skew your score possibly, and it happens all the time with judging, by the way. It's I see it. I try not to do it. It doesn't mean that I don't do it sometimes.
Well, your palate is your palate. You can't change that.
Your palate is your palate. And I know some critics that I'm more aligned with, and if I see a high score from them, I'm like, oh, this should be a solid wine or wine I like. But I don't blindly follow. And in the end, the wine you like the most is the best one.
That's the bottom line. And I tell people that, look, there's flaws, and wines have flaws. And yes, wine's subjective, and what you don't like, and my palate's different than yours, always will be. But there's certainly wines that are bad and that have character flaws that you might like, but we can do better if we just give it a little more time. But one thing it just hit me while we were talking this, that is void during the competitions may not be as void during the Sucklings and Parker type evaluations, but the story. And so you don't get you're judging wines based on the character in the glass, the quality of the structure, the fruit component, the acid component, all the things that go into that. But we're missing the story, and that's kind of an important part of wine, isn't it?
Okay, if by story you mean the description they put together?
No, the history of the winery, here's a thought. I think we're going to Armenia. On Friday, I have a tasting on Monday. Armenia is a young wine world. Takes dozens of years at least to figure out what's going to grow well and how to make what grows there, right? many vintages to understand. But there's some good stories there. There's some good history. There's wine for 6,000 years. And the point I'm trying to make is, I think that the more vintages that are under the belt of a winemaker, the more they bring to the table. You may not taste some specific character in the glass that this person what they've gone through in their life to get there, but it's certainly reflected in the overall bottle, isn't it?
Yes, and I honestly think, like seconding what you said, if you know the story behind, the wine tastes better. I had actually a private event this weekend, and I spoke very passionately about a Greek wine I was serving. It was Moscofilero.
Really? Wow, yeah.
And I was
Great
telling them
wines.
how it brought me to my childhood because it just smelled like elderflowers. And I grew up drinking elderflower syrup. My mom
Wow.
would pick it in the backyard. And I was talking to these people, and there was one non-wine drinker. And she said in the end, Nadia, for first time, I like a wine. But I don't think it's because of the taste of the wine, but all the stories you're saying about Greece and how, and your personal relationship with the wine. So wine is subjective and romantic.
And this is a new thought for me, and I'm glad we have a chance to peel it back, is those tastings don't bring that into account. And part of my issue with judges and judgings and gold medals and things, it's kind of weird. Early in my career, when we would in this picture, for instance, my father and I, when we would do a show, or we would taste wine, and our wines end up getting gold medals, but we had featured them months before. We were so proud of that. Just meant that we kind of understood what that wine was about. But now I reflected, it completely is void of what that memory you had as a child that this elderberry character was coming from. How about, the day I went to Italy, or the day one of your clients went to Italy and they had a wine at a little restaurant, and they're watching the Colosseum, or they're in some little town and they have this amazing memory. Isn't that part of what the wine experience is about?
Absolutely. And I try to incorporate stories, personal or others' interesting stories, when I talk about wine, because I think people relate to the stories. I honestly, I don't like to tell people in detail, and our kind of sommelier descriptions that you read, in magazines. You lose people. It's personal stories, and I tell people, I don't want to tell you what I'm tasting. I want you to tell me what you are tasting. Where is this wine bringing you? People try to think that we all should taste the same thing, but tasting is based on personal experience.
So you nailed that right there. The second part of that, which was where it's bringing you, is probably the most important piece of this. Because,
Yes.
like you said, if I sense cranberries or vanilla or oak or whatever, and somebody feels bad because they don't get it, right?
Exactly.
They don't taste that.
Exactly.
Well, your palate, we have how many receptors on our tongue? We don't all get the same stuff. But when you say, in your case, this elderberry character took you to Bulgaria, and certainly, there's a lot of things about Greek wines, for instance, that would take you to the Mediterranean, the saltiness and the savoriness of the wines. You're going to go, yeah, I feel I'm in a different place. And that's what wine, in my opinion, should be doing to you. And
Absolutely.
when you said typicity of a wine, well, we have California Cabernets, and that's a rather big swath of land, so we're not going to go anywhere necessarily, but we certainly can express the typicity of Cabernet, right?
Absolutely. And there's some great cabs from Napa.
So what do you do? What do you do when you tell a client, they go, I went to the market the other day, and there's a shelf talker on every freaking, like my picture here, a shelf talker. Every wine now seems to have a shelf talker. But for the customers, a shelf talker is a little tag that when you go to Ralph's and you see all yellow down the row, you're like, I'm so confused.
I don't.
What do you tell them?
Ignore them.
How are they choosing?
You know what? I like to believe they're there for a reason, and maybe they help some people. I just don't like people to tell me what I taste, and I don't tell people what they taste. Right. Again, we're different, but
how do you tell them to choose a wine like that? Talk to the store manager. Are there any wine shops left in Redondo Beach or in the South Bay and Manhattan?
Paul.
I know there's Uncorked, a couple of those.
Uncorked. I have a wine club through Uncorked, by the way.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Their highest end club, and Pisson
They're great
Club is
people. I know
mine.
them.
Yeah. So they opened a new location in Manhattan Beach.
Yeah.
They remodeled it.
The old Bacchus thing.
The old Bacchus, and I'm doing events there
Oh, great.
in collaboration with them.
We probably walked by how many times? I'm there all the time.
You should come.
Arthur
we
J.
should
I'm
have
there
an
all the
event.
time.
Yeah. We should do events there together, maybe.
Yeah.
You'll be my guest.
You know our
speaker.
favorite place is now Nando. You've been to Nando? It's on
I
the other side of the
haven't yet.
Oh, my God. He's coming on the podcast. It's amazing food.
My new favorite place is Raila in Hermosa
Oh,
Beach.
yeah. We haven't been there yet.
It's Japanese.
Yeah, it looked a little too eclectic. Well, for us, we go to the beach. I want like a cheesesteak sandwich, but
No, you should try it. It's pretty good.
so the reason I brought that up is that actually the Hermosa Beach Vons, up until maybe a year ago, I was in there doing a little rant, a little self rant on a video. It was actually about Snoop Dogg's Cali Red, and the department manager at the time, the young woman came up. She says, "What are you doing, sir?" I was like, "Well, what are you filming?" I said, "Oh," and I told her what I was doing. She says, "I wanted to hire her." I offered her a job. I said, "Look, you get it. I need people like you on my staff." And she fell in love and moved to Tennessee, so it didn't happen. But sometimes there is a department manager at a store like that is knowledgeable. Most of the time, I recommend go to the local wine shop, tell them what you like.
Exactly. This is exactly what I was going to say. One of my goals as an educator, I try to help people understand their palate, understand what they like, but more than that, also to be able to describe what they like. Because many people actually describe what they like, but it's not really what
It's hard
they like. Yeah, for example,
superimpose on something else.
Yes, or at least know some classic producers that you like. So it gives me a very good idea. And I'm like, go to a local shop, just talk to people and ask them, recommend something. And this is what I like. This is what I drink. Usually, can I try something in that area? And if it's a great shop, and usually.
Have you seen any change in the consumers in the last years you've been doing this? Are the questions still the same? It's because we're always bringing new people into the fold of wine, and so we're going to get that same question: what does it mean on the label when I do this? Or I don't get that flavor. How do you describe it? Or are the questions seem to be a little more advanced, a little more interesting?
I like to believe, and I actually believe it, that people are getting better and better with wine, more sophisticated with wine, and one of the greatest changes that I've noticed and I love, it's people are opening to the world. Years ago, it was mainly, and it still is, we are heavy on California wine, but now people want to try Portuguese wines. They will try the Greek wine, the Armenian wine, and just they ask for orange, the natural, organic. They're much more curious and much more open to suggestions.
Yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned a whole bunch of stuff that we could probably talk for another 20 minutes on, at least organic orange and the rest of it. But
we don't have to. We don't have to.
We'll have to do it again on a second time because we're already at the end of our 45 minutes. But it's been a fabulous conversation to hear from your point of view on what people are looking for and staying in tune with those. It's really putting your pulse on what's going on in the wine industry. And it's important for somebody like you who's an educator, who's out in the streets, who's asking the questions, wants to understand the answers, and then formulates an opinion or a direction based on that. So I'm going to give you a tough question. You ready?
I might give you a tough answer.
I'm sure it's the case. This is a book called Wine is the Best Medicine. It's written by a French doctor in the 70s. It was an MD. He's also a homeopathic doctor. And so he took the French varietals in the French regions of the world, of France, and has crafted symptom relief and or cures for a number of human maladies. So if I give you a malady, I'm going to give you 3 choices. Now, this is much like your accreditation tests because it's not necessarily whether you get the answer right, because you have a 33% chance of that anyway, but it's like why you chose that answer. Kind of like the Master of Wine test. So let's just say you have a fever. Okay?
Okay.
You could have, and I'm going to ask the dosage of this as well.
Okay.
You could have a red Burgundy, you could have a Saint-Emilion, or you could have a dry champagne to alleviate a fever. And by the way, the success of this
that's
is
a very you said it's going to be a tough question.
Yeah.
It isn't easy.
Okay, give it.
It's
Give it to me, girl.
Dry champagne.
Wow, you're right.
Seriously?
Yes. Oh wait. Oh, that's great. You just blew it. You could have said, "Yeah, obviously," but then you said, "Seriously."
No, because I still was expecting some difficulty here. So that's why I just.
Well, give me a reason for that.
It's funny because the first thing that came to my mind without you mentioning the three was champagne. Because you're burning. You want something, crisp, refreshing. I'll pour a bottle of champagne on the top of my head after I taste it, but it's a waste.
Well, how much? Will that be? That's not exactly what the answer was.
But,
poured on your head. But
how much?
How much did you drink if you have a fever?
A glass.
Okay, well, you're semi-right, but that was fascinating because you were very confident in the immediate decision. According to Dr. Murray, the reason champagne is success for that is because there's a phosphorus, which is eminently stimulating, and sulfur in its sulfate of potassium form, whose detoxifying action on the body has been established. And unfortunately, your dosage is a little off in that it's 1 bottle a day.
I like this answer better. I like the real answer better. I just didn't want to sound like alcoholic.
However, the 1 glass was accurate, but he's saying 1 glass an hour.
An hour. This is what I meant. I meant an hour.
Yeah, right.
And
okay,
all
I'm
the
sorry.
reasons you mentioned
Sure.
is exactly what I meant.
That's what you're talking about. And so the worst case is, in fact, I guess one of the answers would be, hey, if you're drinking a glass of champagne an hour, you're feeling pretty good anyway, fever or not, right?
Exactly.
Been such a fabulous conversation. I hope we can do it again. Would love to see you in action down in the beach cities, which we're there quite frequently. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming out and joining us
Thank
today.
you for having me, Paul.
Cheers.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Cheers. Cheers with water. Oh.
Cheers with water. Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.